Scott, any last minute co-host additions, please?
I think we're good. And
Ian,
do
how
you just
about
want to
Ian?
let us know when you're good from IM side?
Almost 30 seconds and we're good. How about
Okay,
Ian?
great. Thanks.
Where did you go, Ian? There
I'm
you
good.
are.
I'm just gonna lurk here.
And Mark, does he need to be co-host? Scott, Mark Carreras.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great.
All set.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our second bidders conference for our RFP. I want to thank the three of you for participating in the bidders conference. I have a little bit of housekeeping remarks, and then we can get started. So we'll do our best to facilitate a smooth meeting with public participation. There are two formats for participation, either on Zoom or via teleconference. Before we begin, I want to just review some guidelines and general instructions for the meeting. Please silence your other communication devices, such as your cell or desk phone. This will ensure that we're not hearing any feedback or causing interruption during the meeting. All participants on Zoom, except for South Coast AQMD staff, will be placed on mute by the host. You'll not be able to mute or unmute your line manually. So for those of you on Zoom, if you'd like to make public comment or ask a question on the Zoom screen, please click the raise hand button. You can also use the Q&A button on Zoom to ask questions in writing. For those of you who are calling in on phone, via phone, if we get anyone, you can dial *9 to signal that you'd like to comment. Your name or a part of your phone number will be called when it's your turn to comment, and the host will unmute your line automatically. Please note you can hang up and or leave the Zoom meeting at any time. So it's mandatory to attend one of the two bidders conferences. So if your name is different, your Zoom name is different from your actual name, please let us know so that we can write down your name and give you credit to make you eligible to submit a bid. As for decorum, please treat others with courtesy, civility, and respect. Failure to do so can result in your mic being muted or you being dropped from the meeting. Lastly, please be aware that this video conference meeting is being recorded. By participating in this meeting hosted by South Coast AQMD, you agree to authorize recording of audio and visual content presented during the live event and consent to subsequent use of the recording in the public domain by South Coast AQMD. Okay, so that's all the housekeeping remarks. So we can move to item one, a welcome and introductions. So my name is Scott Epstein. I'm a planning and rules manager and in charge of overseeing our MATE 6 study. So just a bit of background. So we opened our RFP on February 2nd for this research study for up to $850,000 to study concentrations of brake and tire wear throughout our jurisdiction. This is the second bidders conference out of two total. We had a bidders conference last week. Like I said, attendance at one of the bidders conferences is required to be eligible to submit a proposal. So we want to make sure that all bidders have access to all the questions and staff responses asked at both bidders conferences and via email. So the recording of this bidders conference and the previous bidders conference will be posted on the MATE 6 website, which is aqmd.gov/MATE6. And then we'll also post any questions and answers that come in via email. Okay, so with that, I'd like to move on to item two. So we have a presentation by Dr. Nicole Schulte, Dr. Mark Carrera-Sospedra, and Dr. Mohammed Solat. And we can turn it over to Nico.
Thank you, Scott. Good morning, everybody. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the outline of the presentation today. I'll go over the objectives of the RFP, the task specified in the RFP, Mark is going to go over the monitoring capabilities and the work that they're going to conduct. Mohammed is going to go over those monitoring capabilities and the work that's going to be conducted for the multiple air toxics exposure study 6 in parallel with this RFP. Mark is going to go over the modeling capabilities and that work. And then I'll go over some proposal submission procedures and then finally leave it open for questions and discussion. Next slide. So these are the objectives of the RFP. The main objective is to estimate breakware particle and tire and roadware particle exposure concentrations throughout South Coast Air Basin and Coachella Valley. So South Coast AQMD staff will use those exposure estimates to estimate health risks associated with the breakware particles and tire and roadware particles. And the monitoring, modeling, and analysis for the proposed work for this RFP will be performed in coordination with the multiple air toxics exposure 6 study. For those who aren't aware, the MATE studies it's a monitoring and evaluation study conducted in the South Coast Air Basin and Coachella Valley. And this is a follow-up to previous air toxic studies in the area. Next slide. So this is an outline of the tasks specified in the RFP. So we anticipate that contract execution is around August 16th. And so task 1, which is due 2 months after contract execution, is to present the technical proposal study design to the MATES 6 technical advisory group. Task 2, which is due 6 months after contract execution, is a literature review to identify pollutants or substances that make up breakware particles and tire and roadware particles. Task 3, also due 6 months after signing, is to develop a method to estimate the exposures to breakware particle and tire and roadware particles. Task 4, this is due 30 months after signing. This is to actually conduct the measurements, modeling analysis, and to estimate the exposures for MATE 6. And then task 5, which is due 39 months after signing, is to transfer the final data and prepare the draft final report. And then finally, task 6, due 42 months after signing, is a presentation, technical reports, and study publication. And so the presentations, will include a presentation to staff via Zoom, and then potentially include presentations to the South Coast AQMD Governing Board or Advisory Committee, or to the MATES Technical Advisory Group. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are some details of the tasks in the RFP. So first, the proposed work must quantify both the directly emitted and the resuspended, or the combination of the two, of the PM10 breakware particles and PM10 tire and roadware particle mass concentrations. And we're specifically looking for exposures to those particles emitted from on-road vehicles and roadways. So the proposed work must separate or identify the PM10 mass of breakware particles and tire and roadware particles that come from direct emissions from on-road vehicles and roadways, or resuspension of those particles, and that must be separated from those emissions from other sources. Additionally, the proposed work must, at a minimum, identify or quantify the substances that were identified in the task 2 literature review, and that also have the associated Office of Environmental Health Hazards Assessment, cancer potency factors, or reference exposure levels. Additionally, so these exposure estimates must not rely only on the model calculations, because the emission estimates used in those calculations may have large uncertainties. So the proposed work must include measurements of the breakware particle and tire and roadware particle within South Coast AQMD to better quantify those exposures. Next slide. Some more could you go back a few slides? Okay, some more details of the tasks. So The exposure estimates developed in the proposed work must have a spatial resolution of approximately 2 kilometers or finer. And so we anticipate that both measurements and also modeling will be required to achieve this spatial resolution and the coverage over the South Coast Air Basin and Coachella Valley required in this RFP. So for any modeling work that's conducted for this study, it's desirable for the contractor to use a modeling system similar to that South Coast AQMD staff will use for MAID 6, or the contractor may collaborate with South Coast AQMD staff to conduct some of the modeling related activities. And so Mark is going to go over more of those modeling capabilities later. Additionally, if any modeling work that the contractor conducts, if there's emissions or input data developed in that modeling work, that data should be provided to South Coast AQMD staff so that staff can use it independently for independent modeling work. And that data, the emissions and other input data, should be ready to use within the South Coast AQMD modeling platform. Next slide. Okay, so I'll turn it over to Dr. Mohammed Salat to go over the monitoring capabilities.
Thank you, Nico, and good morning, everyone. As Nico mentioned, I'll be going over the monitoring capabilities that we plan to deploy as part of the MAID 6 study. Next slide, please. So starting off with time-integrated particulate measurements, as you can see on the slide, we plan to collect filter samples for 3 different size fractions, and that includes PM2.5, PM10, and TSV. Starting with PM2.5, we plan to collect filter samples at 6 sites, and we plan to do chemical analysis, including elemental and organic carbon, ions and metals, as well as particulate mass concentration analysis. For PM10, filters will be collected at all 10 sites and will be analyzed for the same components as PM2.5 with the addition of levoglucosan, which is a tracer for biomass burning. And lastly, for TSP, we are going to collect filter samples at 2 sites, and we are going to analyze them for metals as well as hexavalent chromium. Next slide, please. Moving on to time-integrated gaseous and semi-volatile measurements. For these analyses, samples will be collected at all 10 sites and will be analyzed for VOCs, carbonyls, and PAHs. And the VOC analysis includes ethylene oxide. Next slide, please. And with regard to continuous measurements, we are going to continuously measure particulate mass, concentration, black carbon, ultrafine PM, metals, organic carbon, ammonia, and ethylene oxide. I would like to add that for some of these pollutants, for example, ultrafine PM and black carbon, continuous measurements will be conducted at all 10 sites, but for some other pollutants, continuous measurements are going to be done at a more limited number of sites. For example, for metals, we are going to do continuous measurements at 5 sites, whereas for ammonia, for example, we are going to do continuous measurements at 3 sites only. Next slide, please. And as my last slide, I wanted to talk briefly about some of the potential resources that can be shared with the contractors. First off, we will be able to share the data from continuous and time-integrated measurements to support their work. We should note that we can share the data only after the QA/QC process has been done on the data, and after that, we will be able to share the data. Another potential resource that we can share would be the filters from non-destructive analyses. One good example is the Teflon filters that we are using for metals analysis using XRF for PM2.5 size fraction. This is a non-destructive analysis, so the filters could be potentially used for further analysis if needed. In addition to that, there might be limited space, power, and sampling resources available at some of the stations in case additional sampling or monitoring is needed. I wanted to emphasize here that this would have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. We would have to talk about, details of the objectives, outcomes, in order to make an informed decision on if and how we can share resources. And lastly, limited laboratory resources for additional chemical analysis might be available as well. One good example that I can give you is that based on the feedback that we receive from the tag members, we are looking to add a few species to our analysis. That includes, for example, adding lithium to metals analysis. And also we are looking to add methane sulfonic acid and oxalate to our chemical analysis because they're believed to be tracers of sources. So adding them could potentially improve our source apportionment analysis. And yeah, that's all that I wanted to share with you today with regard to monitoring capabilities. And with that, I'll pass it on to Dr. Mark Carreras. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about the modeling capabilities that we use here at AQMD, not only for MATES related stuff, but also we do modeling for SIP development. So next slide. So as I mentioned, we have a suite of modeling platforms that we use in our work. This modeling platform includes emissions modeling, meteorological modeling, and chemical transport modeling. For emissions models, we use INFAC, we use the biogenic model for Megan, and we process most of the anthropogenic emissions using the SMOKE platform. We typically use WRF as the meteorological model, and then we use CMAQ. Typically, we've been using CMAQ for the SIP modeling, for attainment demonstrations, and historically we have used CAMAX as the model for MATES. But we are considering unifying everything using CMAQ for the next MATES round. For a SIP modeling, typically our setup is that we have the model that covers the entire Southern California area with a 4-kilometer grid resolution. As I said, we typically use CMAQ. The latest setup that we've used for the latest air quality management plan and the current PM plan that we're working on is based on emissions for 2018. And then we have projections for milestone future years of 2023, 2025, and 2030. For MATES, we typically have a higher resolution, and so for MATES we use a 2-kilometer by 2-kilometer grid spacing. We've used a CAMAX, which allows for tracing of tracking of tracers. So that means some toxic components that are considered not reactive. We trace those, and so we calculate transport throughout the basin. You can see that the graph on the right is the typical modeling domain that we use for MATES, which covers pretty much all it covers the entire air basin and pretty much all the jurisdiction of the district. We typically model toxics and also PM for the entire year. So we model hour by hour of an entire year. So for this particular plan, we are modeling 2018, and we did the same for the MATES 5 study. Next slide. For emissions in particular, we want to just be as precise, as comprehensive as we can. And so some of the more important sources we try to use the as much as information as possible to allocate those emissions in the right places. So one of them is the emissions from on-road sources, and we have collected data from real-time sensors. There's sensors generally, they are not differentiate between the vehicle classes. So we use these Caltrans PEMS network to allocate the emissions from on-road light-duty vehicles. There is some algorithms developed by some research group that can then disaggregate the heavy-duty portion, and then we use that also to allocate heavy-duty vehicles in our modeling domain. So this is pretty much real-time sensor data. So we have hourly distribution of the emissions in all the roads that have sensor data. So we can use that to allocate the emissions. Next slide. Other sources that are important for air quality in our region are OGBs. We started using these in the last AQMP, and we used this system. It's the automated identification system that provides information on the location of the ships, and also provides information on the operational mode. So the emissions from each operational mode change. So it's important to have the location of each of these individual operational modes well defined in our modeling domain. Next slide. Another source of emissions that we have modeled is aircraft, and we use this positioning system that so we have real-time data as well to allocate the emissions from airplanes. Next slide. And then so basically the task that we do is that we have the specially allocated emissions. Then we feed them into our modeling system, whether it's the modeling system for MATES or the modeling system for CMAQ. We allocate the emissions of sorry, we have some drama here. And then we turn the concentrations into calculating exposure and population cancer risks. So we can determine the contribution of cancer risks for the different species. And I pass it back to Nico.
Thanks, Mark. Next slide, please. Okay, so in the next couple of slides, I'll go over some procedures for proposal submission. Next slide. Okay, so if your proposed work relies on any work that South Coast AQMD will conduct in parallel with the study for this RFP, then you must obtain a letter of support from South Coast AQMD. So for example, if you want to put monitors at any of our monitoring stations or use available space or power, or if you want to use, if you want the modeling group to conduct any modeling work in coordination with the proposed work, then you should obtain a letter of support. So please ask any questions, at the conference today, or contact myself, the project officer, to discuss any support that South Coast AQMD can provide. Like Scott mentioned at the beginning, any answers to questions will be published at the website here on the slide. You must submit any questions by March 25th. And then to actually request support or a letter of support, that must be requested from myself, the project officer, by April 2nd. Next slide. So this is a timeline of all the important dates. So today, March 13th, is the second bidders conference. So like I just said, March 25th is the last day to submit questions. Request support by April 2nd. Proposals are due on May 2nd, no later than 2 p.m. Pacific Daylight Saving Time. And the anticipated contract execution is then on August 16th. And again, contact myself. My contact information is here on the slide to ask questions or request support. Next slide. For the actual proposal submission, make sure that the proposals are signed. Electronic signatures are acceptable. You must submit hard copies of the proposal. They must arrive at South Coast AQMD by May 2nd, no later than 2 p.m. Pacific Daylight Saving Time. So the address to mail those to is here on the slide. You must submit 4 hard copies in a sealed envelope. Mark the upper left-hand corner with your name and address, and then the words request for proposals P 2024-09. Next slide. Okay, so yeah, we encourage you to ask any questions. So I'll turn it back over to Dr. Scott Epstein to lead the open discussion.
All right, thanks guys. So we are now moving on to agenda item 3, which is our open discussion. We're hoping that you'll ask us questions about the support that we can provide. We mentioned before, we'll post this webcast and then all follow-up questions via email on our website. It's possible we'll have to get back to you with our responses to some questions today. And if that's the case, we'll get back to you and we'll also post our response on the website so anybody can see it. All right, so it looks like Jing Lee has their hand up. And has to unmute. And go ahead when you're ready.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Thank you. I have some questions regarding the support from AQMD. So the first one is about the location. So I saw the slides says we could use the sampling location of AQMD. I found that you have 10 sites of PM10 sampling site. So that means we could collocate our sampling set there, right? Like using different monitors under your monitoring shelters, using the power's electricity there.
Yeah, I think, Jason, do you want to field that question?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for the question, Jing. So we do have the 10 air monitoring stations that are part of the stationary portion of MATES 6. So if the project does detail and need the 10 sites, then we'll have to evaluate the type of equipment you have, the power, and then also the access. So if your team members need access, we'll have to evaluate each site depending on the equipment and the level of access that's needed. But that's something that you can talk with us. And then also if we support it, then we would write in writing that we would support that.
Thank you, G. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
And also, I'm wondering, like, could AQMD help get some support from some local business or local like government agencies? Like if we want to use some like traffic lights poles, something like that. Is that possible?
We'll probably have to discuss that internally and get back to you on that. We didn't anticipate that, but we'll definitely get back to you.
Okay, thank you. So shall I submit the question online or?
We can send you an email.
Okay,
Yeah, if you want to just write it in the chat and we'll follow up on an email and then we'll post the response on the website for anybody else to hear.
Okay, I will write that in chat box later. Thank you.
Okay, great.
And also, sorry, still have some questions. So I also found that AQMD have some laboratory resources. So that means, is it possible for AQMD to help like analyze some filters for metals and organics?
Yeah, so as you may have saw in the presentation, I mean, as part of Mate 6, a lot of the metals and organics are already being analyzed. So it depends because we have very set methods and capability. So it would depend on what metals you're looking for and if we have the capability to do,
Okay.
and also the bandwidth. So again, it may just depend on the proposal. So you can definitely send the request over, and obviously we can review that and see if that's something we can support.
I see. Thank you, Jason. And I also have a question regarding the CMAX model. I'm not very familiar with that model, so I'm wondering, is that model like could AQMD help like turn on or off some certain sources like mobile sources so that in the study like we could validate the data?
We do have the capability to run sensitivity analysis, turning on and off sources.
Okay.
So yeah,
And
we
we, yeah, and if we like you could collaborate with the researchers to do the validation, right? In this project.
Yeah, we can certainly work in parallel, and yeah, based on your proposal, we could definitely depending on the resources, but yeah, something that we could potentially support as well.
And like work in parallel, does that mean like is it possible for like if it's possible for them like AQMD staff who has like expertise in like land use regulation to work with us?
We can, in our case, we haven't experienced with that yet, but it's something that we could consider. But yeah, I guess just at the end, it's like we need to evaluate the proposal and see if we can have resources to work on that.
Okay, I see. Thank you. And sorry, I still have a question about the proposal format. Like, how much do we need to write? Is that a official template? Because I try to figure out if there is a official format, but I couldn't find it. I just wonder how many pages do we need to write?
Yeah, there's no page requirement, but you do have to satisfy all of the
I see.
all the elements that are required in the proposal that we talk about in the RFP.
Yeah, gotcha. Thank you so much. That's all my questions. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Okay, anybody else have any questions? Hey, Jim, here we go. I'll allow you to talk here.
Hey, Scott.
Hey, Jim, good to see you. Or your black box there.
Can you actually see me? Just a few quick questions. One's a clarification. So for the CPC that's measuring ultrafines, is it just a CPC, or do you have a way of differentiating ultrafine concentration from bulk concentration?
That's just a CPC, and it measures total number concentration.
Got it. Okay, good. Yeah. And then another question with regard, really my only other question, for some of the filter/canister-based sampling that you are proposing to have at the sites for gases and particles, is AQMD open to deploying those to laboratory facilities so that under more controlled conditions we can have sort of a side-by-side comparison with between field measurements and lab measurements. Is this something that, for the more portable devices, AQMD might be able to consider?
Hi, James. This is Jason. So if I'm, let me make sure I am clear about this. It sounds like you would like to co-locate measurements against maybe our stationary measurements, so that way you can maybe move the equipment later on to a different location, because it sounds like you just want to essentially calibrate or check as a QC measure some portable equipment.
Yeah, I mean, I think you got essentially the right idea, but basically if we have a facility here that we have sort of been using for measurements of tire and brake emissions, whether we could have the devices that are being deployed for Mate 6 taken over to our lab for just a few measurements, just to have some comparisons between what we've been able to generate in our lab to what you have deployed during Mate 6.
Right. So yeah, it sounds like a co-location for comparison. So we'd be open to that. Just if you're site specific, that may have some limitations depending on space and what the co-location requirements are. So that's something that you just can go ahead and request and we can evaluate.
Great. All right. That's it. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Don't see any other questions. Just wondering, there's somebody on the call with the last three numbers 990. So in order to get credit for this bidders conference so that you can submit a bid, it'd be great if you could let us know who you are so we can give you credit. You don't have to, but that's the only way we can give you credit so that you'll be able to submit a bid. Okay. Anybody else have any other questions? Okay, we have another question. Azameh?
Hi. So I have a question about the modeling. So I was wondering what is your policy? You prefer to run the model by yourself, or you have the model as a support if we need to run it as a second run or whatever? And the other question I have, so are you willing to share with us? I can just hear that you are running the model with the resolution 2 kilometer. So I am wondering, are you willing to sharing with us the emission inventory that you have? So in case we would like to be consistent with your modeling setup. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Azime. So we do have already the setup for Mates 5. So we could definitely share that right away. It's a 2 kilometer. I need to think back how emission sources are disaggregated, but we can certainly share that. For Mate 6, we still have to work on setting that up. So that would take longer time. So we cannot share that now because we don't have it. But we'll do the modeling for Mate 6 anyway. So eventually we would have resources in that regard. And I think that your question of whether we do the running only or you, maybe Scott can chime in here, but I mean, this is open. So your proposal, you can propose if you want to do your modeling on your side, and we can definitely either collaborate or provide feedback, or even if resources permit, just contribute with some additional simulations to help in the study as well.
Yeah, just to follow up on that. So our intention is twofold. So one is we're already running these models. I mean, we have to do modeling as part of MATES. So we want the $850,000 to go as far as it can go, right? And if we're already doing this stuff, it's not that much more effort on our side to help you out with it. That's not a requirement. If you want to do it on your own, that's great too. However, it is preferable that you're using the same or a similar platform as us, because we don't want to create the situation where there are differences in the platform and you know, we have to translate those differences in the platform to the public from both sides, right? We like consistency in the platform so that we can kind of kind of message around a consistent platform. So it's preferable to use a similar platform, but that's not required. And like I said, we can definitely help out, especially if we're already doing the modeling.
Thank you. And 2 kilometer resolution is the highest resolution that you have, right? So, and you have any kind of emission developer expert in your team that can help us for developing higher resolution, or are you even interested to do it? Or the 2 kilometer resolution, do you think would be enough?
You mean higher than 2K? It's just going maybe down to 1K.
Yes.
So we haven't explored going deeper, just also because of resources. I mean, the higher resolution, the more resource intensive, and since we want to still cover the entire basin, but we've kind of done some preliminary work using some hybrid models to analyze gradients are along, especially freeways, and so those are other maybe potential techniques that you could use for that. But I'm not, at least from my perspective, I'm not opposed to going just deeper resolution. It's just like at some point, it's like the computational resources that we need for that. But we can certainly discuss this and maybe even run some sensitivity tests. I mean, it does require additional inputs that not sure we have them yet. So especially for emissions, some of the emissions require spatial surrogates, and so we would have to develop those, and that's also a pretty it takes some effort. So it's something that we will be open for you to propose also, and then we could maybe support try to run some on our own as well. But yeah, we're not. I'm not against to go into higher resolution.
Okay, and we've been discussing internally, Jing, we wanted to respond back to your question about asking help from other agencies for locating monitoring. And I want to tee up Renee Bermudez, who's the atmospheric measurements manager.
Thank you for that, Scott. Thank you for that, Scott. I want to make sure everybody can hear me. So oftentimes we do work with local government agencies to locate monitors at some of their locations. And for any monitors that you would like to locate at, let's say, a city, Caltrans, anything like that, we could make the best effort to work with that agency and make introductions. But ultimately, that responsibility is going to have to be the responsibility of the vendor to secure permission. We can provide background and explanation and make those introductions, but at the same time, it has to be the responsibility of the vendor.
I see. Got it. Thank you, Renee.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Great. So we probably won't respond to that in writing now that we discussed it in the meeting. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay. Well, we scheduled this from 8 to 10, so we're going to all stay online and go dark. But if you think of any other questions or somebody may join with additional questions, we'll be happy to answer them until 10. And thanks so much for joining us. Hi, we see that David Green has joined the meeting. Welcome. So we already went through our presentation, which started at 8 o'clock, and had some questions asked from some other prospective bidders. All this will be posted online, so you'll be able to watch the webinar, but we're wondering if you had any questions. We're still all here until 10 o'clock.
Apologies, I must have transferred the time incorrectly into my diary.
Oh
I was
no, yeah, we just had
expecting to turn up for the
daylight
start of
savings
this.
time.
Ah, no, I'll relax and watch the video once it's posted then, if that's okay.